Next on the 5 o'clock report.
They are a critical part of almost any investigation.
We need to take our time.
Was the Black Hawk too high? Was it on course?
I'm heartbroken.
It's very sad. We are praying for all of the families involved. I couldn't imagine.
Now, let's go to the newsroom.
Searching for victims, searching for answers. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Webster. About 2/3 of the 67 victims of Wednesday night's Washington, D.C. mid-air crash have been recovered from the Potomac, along with clues as to why it might have happened. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy on the recovery of the so-called black boxes.
They are a critical part of almost any investigation. They give us a lot of data points. They can tell us about communications that we may not know about.
NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy.
We have data. We have substantial amounts of information. We need to take our time to make sure it is accurate.
Attention has focused on the altitude and position of the Army Black Hawk helicopter when it struck the American Airlines commuter jet. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth.
Was the Black Hawk too high? Was it on course? Right now, we don't quite know.
Another possible factor, overtaxed air traffic controllers.
CBS News has learned the same air traffic controller managing helicopter traffic was also handling some planes taking off and landing around the time of the collision. Sources say those tasks are usually handled by two different people at that time of day.
CBS's Chris Van Cleve. As a member of Congress, Rochester area Congressman Joe Morelli is a frequent flyer to Reagan National.
Well, I do fly in and out literally every week. So I'm heartbroken for the passengers on both the American Airlines flight as well as the individuals on the Sikorsky Black Hawk helicopter.
Heartbreak as well at Ohio's Cedarville University. Grace Maxwell, a junior engineering student at the Christian school, was among the victims. She was on the first leg of returning to school after flying to Kansas for her grandfather's funeral. Kelly Miller owns a Cedarville pizzeria that Grace frequented.
It's very sad. We are praying for all of the families involved. She's a young girl. I have two daughters her age. I couldn't imagine.
During a Friday morning chapel service, Cedarville President Thomas White noted that while they grieve and don't know why Maxwell was taken home now, he told students, quoting here, "We know there's a God that will make all things new. So we grieve, but not as ones without hope." Maxwell was preparing to go on a mission trip to London. Elsewhere this day, tariff time. President Trump says he plans to follow through with 25% trade tariffs on Canada and Mexico and a 10% duty on Chinese goods effective tomorrow. Why?
Number one is the people that have poured into our country so horribly and so much. Number two are the drugs, fentanyl, and everything else that have come into the country.
Critics are warning the tariffs could wind up driving inflation higher. Mexico's president is requesting Google to not change the name of the Gulf of Mexico on Google Maps. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum on Thursday sent a letter to Google asking them to reconsider the decision to rename the Gulf following President Trump's executive order to call it the Gulf of America. Google says it will only appear as the Gulf of America for those in the U.S. The first American-Israeli citizen held by the Iran-backed terror group Hamas may see freedom tomorrow.
3 more hostages have now been named by Hamas for release on Saturday, tomorrow, and one of them is the American-Israeli Keith Siegel. He's now 65 years old. He was abducted on October 7th along with his wife Aviva. She was freed a few weeks later in November in the first group of hostages.
That's Elizabeth Palmer in Jerusalem. That's some medical news for you next. First, the FDA has approved a new pain reliever.
The pill is from Vertex Pharmaceuticals and is designed for acute pain that often occurs after surgery or injuries. Unlike opioids, it blocks pain by working on nerves outside the brain. This is the first new pharmaceutical approach to treating pain in 20 years, and it's expensive, $15.50 a pill.
CBS's Michael Toscano. And did you floss this morning? Sure hope so.
People who floss once a week have a lower risk of stroke. An American Heart Association study suggests oral health is linked to overall health. Researchers say regular flossing lowers the chance of oral infections and inflammation and encourages other healthy habits.
That's CBS's Michael George. The study found that even without routine dental checkups or counting how often people brush their teeth, those who floss their teeth at least once a week drop their stroke risk by about a third. A fundraising concert in Los Angeles for wildfire victims. Several well-known pop performers were there, including Red Hot Chili Peppers and Stevie Wonder. Still to come on the 5 o'clock report, transgenderism, abortion, immigration. A few of the challenging topics addressed on this week's edition of Capital Connection. We've got a recap for you just ahead.
The call for tonight, snow or rain changing to snow, tapering to flurries. And there will be a few inches accumulating in the northern locales of western and central New York. Temperatures tonight plunge ultimately into the teens. Very slick and icy conditions will develop in some areas. Tomorrow, much colder than it was today. Morning flurries, otherwise mostly cloudy. High 17 to 22. Not as cold on Sunday, but mostly cloudy with a little snow later in the day. The high Sunday in the 30s.
Thank you very much, Kevin Williams. Actions in Washington are affecting issues in Harrisburg and Albany. Up next, we have some highlights for you from this week's top political and cultural stories on Capital Connection. Your host is Bob Price.
The president this week has signed an order that bans child sex change operations. Jason, how big of a deal is this?
Well, I think it's a huge deal. You know, if you consider the fact that the president ran on these campaign promises, we're seeing him fulfilling those promises, and I think in ways that were larger than many involved in the social conservative movement had anticipated. You know, we're seeing more and more done by executive action, which is good because these atrocities against our kids have to stop now. But I do hope that these will move to legislation so it cannot be undone 4 years from now. But I will tell you, I'm very thankful for the message that it sends to places like the University of Rochester, that here in the Rochester region is leading our state in, sadly, those mutilation surgeries.
And a lot of it's happening in Pennsylvania as well, Michael. But there's victory there in Lancaster County. The Elizabethtown School District this week voted 8-1 to kind of beat back some of the trans indoctrination there when it comes to pronoun use and biological boys in women's sports. Your reaction to that?
Well, we're excited for that 8-1 vote there in the Elizabethtown area school district. What's important about this is that we have this executive order from President Trump related to only two genders. That relates to federal law, and the local school boards still need to take action like the Elizabethtown area school district did to protect girls' sports in their local community.
Last week, Jason, the New York State Senate voted to protect, promote, and fund abortion through 5 new bills. And could you please explain how could it be necessary to do any more kind of abortion expansion?
Well, you know, evil's appetite is insatiable. And when it comes to abortion, that's certainly true. There is always new ways that people that are chasing after this evil industry of the abortion profit industry are finding ways to expand it more and more. Right now, one of the bills that the Senate passed would actually allow for a new training program in New York for abortionists. And they specifically indicated this would not just be for New York abortionists, but we would bring people from across the country to be trained in how to bring abortion back to their places in the country. Here in New York, they're looking for ways to demonstrate they are still very pro-abortion.
Yeah, I know, Michael, you are invigorated on the pro-life front, having just returned from the National March for Life in Washington, where we saw just tens of thousands of people take a stand for life. But the fight goes on in Pennsylvania as well. The number of women in your state who've been harmed by chemical abortions has doubled in just 3 years.
Yeah, our team here at PA Family pays close attention to the numbers that are coming from the Pennsylvania Department of Health regarding abortion and the big increase in those complications. But oftentimes there's not a lot of detail attached to those numbers, but this is what we know. There's been a rapid growth in the use of chemical abortions, the so-called abortion pill, ever since the Biden administration's FDA dangerously lowered the standards for its use. And with abortion groups like Planned Parenthood encouraging the notion that it's a safe and easy solution, many women believe them and end up taking the abortion chemicals and then suffer very significant complications, including severe bleeding and worse. And they experience, sadly, these dangerous complications often alone at home. It's very sad and very bad.
Michael, many Christians are conflicted about immigration policy, and even asking questions like this: would Jesus support the deportation of migrants like we're seeing in the Trump administration? How do you reconcile this issue with faith?
Well, I know that there are a variety of opinions on this, but as I look at it, there are a couple of biblical passages or themes that I would point to. The first one involving the rule of law and God's purpose in the creation of civil government, and the Romans 13 guidance on how we as believers are to respond to the lawful mandates of government. Secondly, as the Apostle Paul spoke at the Areopagus, as recounted in Acts chapter 17, it is God who formed the nations and set their boundaries in place. So the existence of boundaries is not just a human invention, and by their very definition, boundaries or borders are a requirement for there to be distinct nations.
Well said. People in Congress say some pretty outlandish stuff. This one might take the cake. When it came to the House passage of that new trans athlete ban in women's sports, Jeffries said this would unleash predators on girls.
There seems to be a tactic of the left to completely turn talking points around and use them the opposite of what would actually occur. This was an effort to protect women in private, safe spaces, to keep them from having predators coming into those places. Jeffries and others are completely twisting the storyline, believing they can keep selling the narrative to the public. But the reality is, as the last election showed, Americans are no longer buying it. They're starting to see through the gaslighting that's occurring.
Jason McGuire of New York Families and Michael Gear of PAFamily.org. Our full 10-minute conversation is on Family Life's Capital Connection podcast page and can be heard during the Friday Noon Report. That and all of our original podcasts are yours to have at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or FamilyLife.org. Your nightly market report is up next, brought to you by Faithward Advisors. January ending with stocks lower on Wall Street. Markets took a pretty good hit after the White House announced new tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China, which will take effect on Saturday. Stocks dropped on the news with the Dow Jones Industrial Average down sharply in late trading at the closing bell. The Dow fell 337 points to 44,544. The S&P 500 lost 30 points to 6040. The Nasdaq fell 54 points to 19,627. Faithward Advisors, a Christian financial planning firm helping faithful stewards do more. Details are available at faithwardadvisors.com. This is the 5 o'clock report on Family Life.
For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Hi, I'm Rob West with today's Faith and Finance Minute. Jeremiah 29:11 is a comfort to those who fear the uncertainty of the future. We can be confident knowing that God is our true source of hope. God promises to meet our needs, and He always keeps His promises. In Philippians 4:6, Paul gives us a prescription for confidence. He says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. In earnest prayer, ask God to align your will with His, and He will give you peace, and soon your fear of the future will be a thing of the past." We can help you learn to manage your money according to biblical principles when you download the free FaithFi app. You'll find it on our website at faithfi.com.
Still to come on the 5 o'clock report, meet America's newest superhero. Well, sort of anyway.
Rain is changing abruptly to snow in parts of the area this evening, and watch for some slippery travel tonight, developing mainly western and central New York. It's a quieter but much colder day tomorrow. The next system brings a bit of snow later Sunday. The call for tonight, snow or rain changing to snow, tapering to flurries. And there will be a few inches accumulating in the higher portions and northern locales of western and central New York. As temperatures plunge into the teens and 20s, slippery conditions develop. Much colder tomorrow than it was today. Morning lake flakes, then sunshine. High temps, mid-teens to mid-20s, closer to 30 in eastern Pennsylvania.
All right, thank you very much, Kevin Williams. Finally at 5, introducing America's newest superhero, Jump Rope Man. Well, actually, we're talking about David Fisher. He is a professional jump roper. He travels the world giving amazing demonstrations of jump roping skill. He's even written children's books about a jump rope hero. So when he heard calls for help from a teen who'd fallen into an icy Indiana pond,
I just instinctively went right for my bag of jump ropes and pulled out the double Dutch ropes. I headed out on the ice pond. I can hear the ice cracking underneath my feet.
Undaunted, he eventually used the rope to haul the teen to safety and is being lauded as a hero, though he says that's a bit of a leap.
I feel like someone who just acted on instinct. I would hope that, when cries go out, at least that everybody could do whatever it is that they might be able to do to help.
David Fisher, not afraid to jump in and help. And that's the world we live in for Friday, January 31st, 2025. Thank you again for joining us. Have a blessed weekend. I'm Mark Webster, Family Life News.